Hello and welcome to a DAZN Soccer Special. This is a stateside special as well. We're joined by Leanne Sanderson, who spent so many years in America playing for several different clubs. And we're joined by Matt Slater from The Athletic as well, chief football reporter out in the States. Matt, there are currently sort of 8 clubs owned by American owners in the Premier League. Gary Neville had said some strong words about those owners as well, saying they're a clear and present danger to English football. Let's talk about that first, about what he said. Is there any truth to that, do you think?
Well, actually, I think there are 10 Premier League clubs that have US investment in them in terms of minority stakes. So one more, and you've got the majority. And Bournemouth are in talks right now with a US owner. So we could well have a majority that are owned by Americans. Now, whether it's a clear present danger or not, it's certainly a great soundbite. Well, sort of yes and no, really. And it kind of really depends on your view on these things. So Americans are interested in our clubs because they think the Premier League's the most attractive league. They're really into soccer now. They bring ideas, enthusiasm, money. The broadcast rights in the States have gone up stratospherically. That is one of the main reasons why the Premier League has this huge financial advantage over the rest of Europe. More eyeballs brings more sponsors, brings more interest in summer tours. So there's a virtuous financial circle there. The flip side, I guess, is we are slowly ceding control to Americans, and Americans have a very different view of sport. So the clear and present danger bit, I guess, is if you are worried about things like the Super League, and if you are worried about things like franchise moving around and doing away with relegation and concentrating more money and power at the top. So that's the concern, how you feel about American owners and whether they will want to do things like they do things at home. Whether they will be custodians and sort of be respectful of European football customs, or whether they'll go, do you know what? This is not how we do things at home. And back at home, we all make money, and the NFL does really well, and NBA does really, really well. Why don't we do it our way here too? So that's where we're at.
We're going to touch on the idea of sort of franchise and all-star games very shortly. Leanne, as I mentioned at the top, you played in America for several teams for several years. What's the appetite out there, would you say, for not just the Premier League, but the Champions League? I mean, are they as interested in it as we think they are?
It's definitely grown. I mean, I lived in America for 12 years and I moved there in 2011. When I first got there, the MLS was still only about 10, 15 years old. And they were still just about, someone told me that they were even taking penalties. When they went to penalties, they were doing breakaways from the halfway line as a penalty shootout. So the MLS was still in its infancy. Like the crowds, our women's game used to get more attendances and it was absolutely brilliant. But I think for me, I love the way the Americans do sports. I go to NFL games, I go to baseball games. I love the whole, the fan fest, the tailgating you do beforehand. Some of the sports I used to go to, I'm not really a big fan of those sports, but I like going for the event. And I think Americans do an event very, very well. But I also like the way we do it in England. And I don't want that to change. I'm not one of those people that doesn't like change. I'm open to any type of change to make it better. But I don't think we should have an all-star game. This isn't the MLS, it's in America. And I find that, for me, I think we're already getting away from the working class fan. And I just am mindful of having more investment from the American owners. It's so expensive to go to a game in America, to go to an NFL game, baseball game. And I think the tickets are going to get even more expensive. And the stadiums are going to, obviously, there'll be more stadiums built. And I think the fans will feel, the working class fans will no longer be able to go anymore. And I think that's quite sad. So I love the way the Americans do it. So I sound like I'm contradicting myself. But I don't want our Premier League, Super League. I never have done. And I don't want it to be an all-star game. And I don't want it to be Todd Boehly was talking about being a southern, north and southern, east and west, like an east. It doesn't work like that in England. We're not trying to change what you do. So don't try and change what we do.
Yeah, look, Matt, you wrote a fantastic piece in The Athletic talking about sort of things like potentially the Champions League, a game going over from the Champions League to America, maybe even the Super Cup going over to America as well. We're already seeing the Super Cup in the Middle East. These things are quite realistic, aren't they? When you think of sort of the American product coming over here, like the NFL games over here, you can eventually see some of the Champions League games potentially going over to America, can't we?
Maybe. I think what's going to happen is the Super Cup. So just to make people to be clear about what the Super Cup is, at the moment it is the Champions League winner versus the Europa League winner. It's in August. Unless your team is in it, I don't think most fans really care about it. It kind of comes and goes. And you sort of, so Real Madrid win, did they? Oh, great. And they've won some more money and blah, blah, blah. And it was a game that took place somewhere in Europe. So it's sort of punching below its weight, but it is a UEFA product. It does make some money. It's part of the rights package that they sell. I think that one will be the one that they take on the road. And it's almost certainly going to be North America. Now, what they're trying to do, I think, is sort of create a bit of an event. So maybe invite 4 teams. So we'll throw the Europa Conference League winner in there, and perhaps maybe the MLS champ. So you make a little 4-team comp, you turn it into a week-long event, a bit like they do at the Super Bowl, where they kind of create a week of content, or the Final Four in college basketball. I think maybe like about an F1 weekend where you have 3-4 days of razzmatazz. The Americans, as Leanne says, are quite good at that, and they'll throw some concerts in there, some ticketed event. Yeah. And they'll do a lot of fan engagement, a lot of tailgating. There'll be parties. So that, I think, is where we're heading. I don't think we are. I think we're a little bit previous if we start thinking about actually taking Champions League games there. And I can't see that quite happening yet. I think there's a lot of opposition. I think there'll be sort of climate change issues, crisis issues as well, and too much football and moving around and all that. But I think again, it's sort of thin end of the wedge type argument. If we do this tournament, what's it a test case for? What are they trying to prove? And I think in 5-10 years' time, we might be talking about taking the final on the road. Now, that I think is their sort of goal. Imagine having a Super Bowl, if you like, a Super Bowl of European football in New York or Miami or LA.
I think as well, that's my worry and concern. I've been to a lot of pre-season games, at the Giant Stadium. I saw Atletico Madrid versus Real Madrid there. They sell out. But I think as well, the romance of Americans coming to England to an NFL game at Wembley or Tottenham Hotspur, a lot of them, they're NFL games that are coming there, they're not friendlies. The Americans love coming here, whereas I find that, imagine how much money that costs to come. And a lot of those people are very fortunate in a position to do that. Whereas imagine the amount of money it's going to cost for somebody to go over to, the Rams Stadium or to go to Vegas to a game. I just don't like the idea of that, because I'm always mindful of wanting the working class fan to still be able to go to the game, because it's already become about money in the industry now. And I know it's unrealistic to think that, everybody's going to always be able to afford to go to sports, but football is supposed to be for everybody, not just for people that are wealthy and have a lot of money. So, I'm all for you. You mentioned about the razzmatazz. The Americans absolutely love it. That's why I lived there for 12 years. I love living in America. But at the same time, I still want the working class football fan to be able to go to these games. And I agree. It's almost like they're doing a test so they can, test the water a little bit to see if we can have an FA Cup final in America or somewhere, because it's all about money.
I guess the biggest test, Matt, right, is the 2026 World Cup, right? Most of those games will be played in the US. We'll see the true growth of the sport in America, I guess, when the World Cup comes round. You think of the 3 biggest sports in America, so American football, baseball, and basketball. How far away do you think football will be, if we can put on sort of our Mystic Meg hats here? How far away do you think football will be in 10 years to those 3 big behemoths?
Well, I think Leanne will have a view on that as well, having just lived there more recently than I have. Look, I lived in the States about 30 years ago. I went to high school there. At that time, no one cared. I mean, soccer was a sport you played at high school. Women's soccer was always good, always big. But after about 17, 18, didn't really have anywhere to go. European football results, you had to wait until the New York Times. You'd have them like in a nib, in the sort of results section on sort of Monday or Tuesday. There was no interest. There was no interest at all. I remember turning up with a football shirt to high school, and it had like a sponsor on, and they thought I worked for it was a works team. It was like, well, what? I think it was a Liverpool shirt, Crown Paints. They were like, why have you got Crown Paints on your shirt? What's all that about? So look, there's the amount of knowledge, the amount of change is remarkable. Some of it's to do with FIFA the game, some of it's to do with Ted Lasso. All these cultural things have created an enormous amount of interest and knowledge, genuine knowledge and passion for our game. So look, who knows where it'll be in 5 years, 10 years time. What I can tell you right now is I think it's probably already level pegging, if not bigger than NHL ice hockey, up there with sort of interest in tennis and golf and NASCAR. The NFL is miles off. So let's just forget the NFL for a bit. And I would probably forget NBA as well for a bit as well. Baseball's interesting because baseball's an aging demographic. Soccer's a young demographic there. It's the cool sport. So look, does it become America's third sport? Maybe.
Maybe indeed. Leanne, look, change is inevitable, isn't it? I mean, Matt Slater said there, right? I mean, 10 of the owners in the Premier League are American. So eventually we are going to see some change, whether it be change we don't want or change that might grow the game. But we are going to see some. It's going to happen. When do you think it will happen, Leanne? Or do you think there'll be pushback from the likes of Gary Neville and others to stop it from happening?
I mean, I think it's been happening in front of our own eyes for the last, 10 years. I mean, Randy Lerner, the Glazers. I'm a Manchester United fan, so I'm not a fan of how much debt they put our club within. John Henry, who I think has done a relatively good job being the Red Sox owner. So I think the product has always been there. But like I said, I just am mindful of it being just becoming about money. And these guys are sharp businessmen. Todd Boehly's been here for 5 minutes and he's already talking about, expansion teams, no relegation. I mean, I think he just needs to take a moment and understand. And I do think sometimes in England, similar to when Jesse Marsh came over, and I've said this many times, we don't seem to be open to Americans talking about soccer in England, like football. Similar to when you hear an English person talk about the NFL, it's almost like the respect isn't there. And I don't like that. I don't like that at all, because it's almost like, oh, what does this guy know? Because he's from America, they call it soccer and we call it football. And I don't like the idea of that. But what I will say is that, like I said, I love living in America, but I don't like the idea that it's going to become about this, about money, and about, and there will be pushback. We saw people like Gary Neville. A lot of people, I think, were able to get rid of the Super League. I know Juventus and those types of teams still wanted to do it, but at the same time, you can have a voice. Everybody's got a voice. I don't think it just needs to be people in the public eye, and nobody's going to really want this to happen, but I think it's been happening. Wouldn't you say, Matt? It's been happening for the last 10 years, and it's just gradually testing the water to see, what next, what can we do next? And more businessmen are getting involved, because let's be honest, they're not going to get involved. Todd Boehly doesn't get involved in Chelsea unless he can make money eventually. They're not just you might as well flush your money down the toilet.
You are correct. Matt, really appreciate you coming on and sort of clearing a few things up for us, as always. Matt Slater from The Athletic. Leanne, always great to have you as well. Thank you very much. Change is coming, people. Can we stop that change from happening? With 10 owners being American in the Premier League, I doubt it.